His portrait hangs in 1100 Longworth, where the committee does its legislative work. So I'm personally reminded every day that I go in to work the legacy that Wilbur Mills left not only to the Congress but to the state of Arkansas.
Well, that's one way to remember the legacy Wilbur Mills left on Congress. That was Representative Beryl Anthony, Democrat of Arkansas, on the House floor, May 12, 1992, a week after Wilbur Mills died. But there's another way to remember the longtime and powerful Democratic chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. And we got a reminder of that recently when Washington Post writer Roxanne Roberts included Wilbur Mills in her list of 8 political sex scandals that threw the nation into a frenzy. How did Wilbur Mills get on that list? Who else is on it? And what do they all have in common? In this week's Extreme Mortman, find out, because we have a very special guest, Roxanne Roberts herself. And we go through each of the scandals. Roxanne explains what happened, why each politician is on the list, and we hear directly from many of them about their scandal and their national frenzy. Roxanne Roberts, a true political junkie, on this episode of C-SPAN's podcast, Extreme Mortman. Yay, Roxanne. All right. Thank you so much for coming in and joining us.
You're
Big
welcome.
picture. Tell us about why you wrote the article and the purpose of this article we're going to talk about.
Well, there's what I kind of call at least an inside the Beltway scandal at the moment, which involves a female journalist named Olivia Nuzzi, who has had some kind of affair. And it's a little unclear exactly because it's weird, but the person she's having that some kind of affair with is Robert Kennedy Jr., secretary, and he's weird. So it's all confusing. She profiled him. She wrote about him. She was engaged. She cheated on her fiance. It created a scandal inside, certainly in the media world. My concern about it, and part of the reason that journalists are at least fascinated with this particular scandal, is that she slept with a source, or she had some kind of sexual texting. It's unclear exactly who did what with whom in what way, but it was sexual in nature. And as a female journalist who had to fight for 30-some years, I've been at the Post for almost 38 years, there was always this underlying stereotype that female journalists use their feminine wiles, flirting or more, to get stories and get information. And as a feminist, A, I've never done that. B, I really reject that notion. And the reason this in 2005 hits hard is that it puts us back to the bad old days when female journalists had to work twice as hard to be taken seriously. So that's the current atmosphere of that specific relationship. But also, we wanted to write about this because sex scandals always pop up in the political atmosphere, and we all have opinions about them. This particular story that we're talking about is about consensual relationships, and I wanted to make that clear because when this was first published, there were a lot of comments like, oh, the Post is trying to distract from the Epstein files, various things like that, and that really wasn't it. It's just that it's two different kinds of scandals. Consensual relationships between two adults, we will talk about why that's problematic, but that's a whole different ballgame than allegations of having sexual relationships with underage women or relationships without any consent, sexual assault, allegations of that. Those are all extremely serious issues. We are struggling as a nation to figure out how we feel about all of that. It's very complicated. And this is more sort of like two people, a male and a female, behaving badly, and why we should care about that.
And why should we care about it, and why do we care about these examples?
We are Americans, and Americans, as a general rule, think infidelity is a bad thing. We do not look the other way. We're not France where there's, a mistress in every corner. It's just not the way we see ourselves as a nation. And the reason that I think it matters, and there was some discussion, I remember very distinctly having sort of a long debate and then writing an article during the Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton scandal about whether or not this was a private betrayal between the president and the first lady, and is it really the country's business? And we're grown-ups. We understand that married people have sex with people who they are not married to, and we kind of get that. But the reason I think it's not just a private matter is the following, and it's what I concluded, almost 30 years ago, and I still believe it, which is that politicians come to us and they say, I want to represent you and your interests. I want to come to Washington. I want to be the person that you trust to make this country better in the way that I have decided is, sort of, I want to represent you. And I mean, it's a little convoluted here, but the basic point is that I'm a certain kind of person. If you vote for me, I'm going to go to Washington and I'm going to do these things, and that's why you should vote for me. And there never in the history of American politics has a politician said, I want you to vote for me. Now, I cheat on my wife, but other than that, I'm a really good guy, and you should vote for me. So when infidelity in a political scandal pops up, then it makes voters wonder what else the person may be doing sort of behind the scenes. Are they an honest person? Are they a reputable person? Do they cheat on their taxes? If they cheat on their wife, maybe they cheat on their taxes. It's hard to know, but the general concept behind all of this is, can you trust a person to do what they claim that they're going to do if they're cheating on their wife? And so I think the answer for every individual voter is different. But the reason these are scandals is that the politician didn't sort of sell themselves as the kind of guy that would be unfaithful. And so, I mean, it's sort of a tortured metaphor in some ways, but being unfaithful to your wife is a little bit sort of like being unfaithful to your voters. Because, you're not the Boy Scout that everybody, I mean, not all these guys are like, I love my wife, I love my family, I love all of you. And then they're not.
Yeah.
And that's a hard pill to swallow, I think. Because we want to believe in these people. Yeah. So much of what we're talking about is trusting that they're going to take our interests and be serious about them. And if you can't trust the people you vote for, then it's a very uncertain and disillusioning thing. Disillusioning? I don't even think that's a word.
It's fine. All right, we're going to get into the clips and examples. I have to ask you this question, though, because I truly find your article fascinating, and we have the clips for each example you have. But in the writing of this, did all these 8 examples instantly come to mind? Like, do you know these, like, encyclopedic memory of consensual political sex scandals?
I knew all the sex scandals. I mean, the question was just for length. We had to kind of cut them down. And again, we made the decision that we would only pick consenting adults.
Okay.
But I knew all the scandals because I've been around for way too long. What researching it was interesting, though, because I discovered a few details I didn't know. Yeah. I knew a lot about them, but I discovered a few things that had me shaking my head even more. I mean, I'm definitely old school on this. I do not think this is a good thing. And so when I did the research on it, I was kind of like, oh, this is worse than I thought. I was very...
Okay, I was going to save this. All right, one more question, then we'll get to the clips. I was going to save this for later. You're passing judgment. You're being very opinionated in this in a way that we normally don't hear. At least from C-SPAN, we would never pass judgment on any of this. We'll play the clips. But you have a little more leeway in exercising your thoughts on this than we would expect. Is that right?
I don't know that this isn't an opinion piece, but if it wasn't something that people felt strongly about, it wouldn't be a national scandal. So I don't think it's a question of being, I personally am judgmental about this, but I think it reflects how most of the nation perceived these. Most of the world, no, not most of the nation, we'll stick to the United States. Most of the citizens of the United States do not, as sort of a basic concept, think cheating on your wife is a good idea. And in this particular case, we're talking about 8 men. So, but we could expand that to say cheating on your spouse, regardless of your gender, is just not something that we think is a good thing to do. We don't think it's fair. We don't think it's moral. We don't think it's right. So I think if it sounds like I'm being judgmental, I think I reflect probably about 90% of the voters in this country.
All right, and I promise.
Is that fair?
That's totally fair, exactly, and I love that a lot, that answer. Last question, then I promise we'll get to the clips. 8 examples here. You edited, you put the length in. Are there 9 examples? Are there any that didn't make the cut?
There's 100 examples.
100 examples. Okay.
Now, there's for these particular ones, for various reasons that we'll discuss, sort of jumped into the national consciousness. There's a lot of examples of politicians just behaving badly. And there is a distinction between what we now call sexual crimes and just somebody being a cad. Somebody, and because I'm sort of second-wave feminism, so, which sort of women started working in the workplace, grew up in the 70s, started working 70s, 80s, and women were not as prevalent, and guys felt comfortable saying, hey, nice legs, and things like that. Things that wouldn't pass muster today. We just kind of thought of that as part of the process. Our job was not to tolerate it in a aggressive way, but kind of just, we put our head down, we worked harder, we tried to ignore it, but we didn't think of those things as crimes. We didn't think of them as a hostile workplace. We just thought this is sexism that we just have to prove ourselves as being professional. And so I think you can find all sorts of examples. Hell, you can go back to JFK, who was sleeping with all sorts of people, but the press covered that up. So there's a zillion examples of how sex and politics have intermingled and caused problems for both the women involved and the politicians. But these particular scandals really broke through and had most people sort of Thanksgiving dinner fights with the family about them.
All right, let's dive right in with Roxanne Roberts of the Washington Post. Our first example of the 8, Wilbur Mills. In April 2009, author Christopher Buckley took C-SPAN's Book TV on a tour of the tidal basin near the Jefferson Memorial. 35 years earlier, on October 7, 1974, Wilbur Mills was at the tidal basin. So was his driving companion, Fanny Fox. She was a $500 a week performer at the Silver Slipper, a burlesque club in Washington. Wilbur Mills was married. Fanny Fox was married, but not to each other. Here's Christopher Buckley with what happened next.
The famous tidal basin, which became, of course, it's too bad it got this association, the old tidal basin, back in the early 70s, but for some people it will be forever associated with Wilbur Mills and Fanny Fox. Fanny Fox being the erstwhile stripper whose trade name was, I think, the Argentine Firecracker. Well, the congressman and Fanny Fox were driving along, probably right along here one night, and I guess drink had been taken, and a police car pulled them over, and Miss Fox, seeking to abscond herself, leapt into the tidal basin. So this lovely body of water is going to be forever associated with a stripper who jumped into it.
All right, Roxanne Roberts, is the tidal basin forever associated with a stripper who suddenly jumped into it?
No. I mean, this happened a long time ago, and a lot of people forgot it. But at the time, it was a big deal. Mills was a very powerful congressman, very well regarded from the South. And he was having an affair with a stripper. Again, not the sort of thing that you put on a campaign ad. And it wasn't just that he was kind of seeing her. It was actually, you're correct, she was married, he was married. He began to socialize. He and his wife played bridge with Fox and her husband. But Fanny Fox fell in love with Wilbur Mills and honestly thought there was going to kind of be a future there. And the night of the tidal basin incident, everybody was blasted. Mills, I don't think, was driving. I think there was a different driver. There were other people in the car. It was like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. They were all drunk. And the car was going too fast. So a policeman stopped. And, I feel bad for that policeman. Imagine, boom, that's exactly, do you know who I am sort of situation. But they were apparently having a fight, Fox and Mills. And she jumped out of the car for some reason, probably because she wasn't thinking clearly, and she jumped into the tidal basin. Tidal basin, the good news for everybody is that it's shallow water, so nobody drowned that night, no tragedies. So, and there happened to be a television reporter and a camera. I mean, the whole thing was just kind of this wild story, this crazy story. As I was researching it, I actually ended up with a kind of compassion for Fox because I felt as if Mills not only had behaved terribly toward his wife, but also terribly toward her, very much so. And then she sort of flipped the script and then began to perform using her notoriety from this and was able to command twice, 3 times. Everybody wanted to know what this woman looked like, and she decided, well, if you can't, beat him, join him. So she kind of leaned into the scandal in that sense.
Wilbur Mills was not a rank-and-file member of Congress, as you pointed out in the clip. I mean, he was the legendary, there's a portrait of him. I mean, he was the big Ways and Means Committee chairman. As you're weaving all this together, there's so many elements of this. Is this conceivable this can happen again today? A congressman who's blasted his stripper girlfriend and died. Do you see it? Well, first of all, do people drink that much anymore? And are any of these elements still plausible now? I don't think
they drink that much anymore. But I spent time thinking about this because I think about politicians a lot. I think about what they do, why they do it a lot, and I can see that a politician whose one of their skill sets is to be charming, is on a retail basis to kind of connect with people, look you in the eye, tell you that the sun is actually the moon, little Shakespeare there. But they're charming, they're smart, they're convincing, they're funny, they're powerful. Some of them are very rich. I can understand why women fall for these guys. Particularly if you're in this very intense Washington atmosphere, where you're working, everybody's there for a common goal. I can see people thinking, this guy is so great, look what he's doing for the world, and look at the way he looks at me. So I can see that. I'm going to give him credit for being a compelling person. Being compelling doesn't mean that that's the right thing to do. It's a good thing to do. But I think that a lot of politicians, a lot of powerful men in general, think that one of the perks of being successful is that a lot of the common rules don't apply to them. And that if the opportunity comes along, they should be able to partake of whatever it is. And we've seen that in a variety of ways in terms of various deals, various corruptions, infidelity, various things. It's always disappointing. But I do think that there is this sense of, godlike status that makes somebody think that the rules don't apply. And the more powerful you are, the more insulated you are from consequences. JFK never during his lifetime was not held accountable for his many, many affairs because he had a whole infrastructure around him to protect the public from finding out. So if you're powerful and you are a ladies' man, I could absolutely see that. I mean, it obviously it still happens today, and it's still bad. But I understand the foundation in which that could happen.
Okay, our next one on Roxanne Roberts' list. 2 years later, Congressman Wayne Hayes, Democrat of Ohio. On May 23, 1976, Roxanne's Washington Post ran a front-page story headlined, "Closed Session Romance on the Hill. Representative Wayne Hayes' $14,000 a year clerk says she's his mistress." The story began this way. For nearly 2 years, Representative Wayne Hayes, powerful chairman of the House Administration Committee, has kept a woman on his staff who says she is paid $14,000 a year in public money to serve as his mistress. Hayes denies this, saying, "Hell's fire. I'm a very happily married man. I can't type, I can't file, I can't even answer the phone," says Elizabeth Ray, 27, who began working for Hayes in April 1974 as a clerk. Since then, Ray says she has not been asked to do any Congress-related work and appears at her Capitol Hill office once or twice a week for a few hours. Currently, she is closeted in a luxuriously appointed office in the Longworth House office building behind a blank door. Supposedly, she says, "I'm on the Oversight Committee, but I call it the Out-of-Sight Committee." According to Ray, the 64-year-old congressman usually has visited her for sexual relations once or twice a week in their long-standing relationship. 2 days after the article appeared, on May 25, 1976, Congressman Hayes spoke on the House floor. He said, "I did have a relationship with Elizabeth Ray. I was legally separated and single. It was voluntary on her part and mine." Wayne Hayes also told Congress that Elizabeth Ray had rather serious emotional problems. He said that when he told her their relationship would have to end, Miss Ray became hysterical, threatened suicide, as she has done many times in the past. She also threatened blackmail, and did blackmail me, and threatened to destroy my engagement. Wayne Hayes also called Elizabeth Ray a seriously disturbed young lady, and "I deeply regret our relationship, and its termination has apparently greatly aggravated both her emotional and psychological problems." Wayne Hayes ended his remarks to the House by saying, "I stand here before you today with my conscience now clear. I sincerely hope that those responsible for this, the Washington Post and Miss Ray, with their forthcoming book and appearance in Playboy, can say the same." Congressman Hayes made those remarks before there were TV cameras in the House, so we can't hear directly from him. But we can hear from someone else, Fawn Hall. During the Reagan administration, Fawn Hall was secretary to Oliver North. On June 8, 1987, Fawn Hall testified in the Iran-Contra hearings. She said something in her opening statement that sure seemed like a reference to Elizabeth Ray.
"I was Lieutenant Colonel North's personal secretary until he left the National Security Council on November 25, 1986. For the nearly 4 years that I worked for Lieutenant Colonel North, my hours were long and arduous, but I found my job to be most fulfilling. During my tenure at the National Security Council, I came to have enormous admiration and respect for not only Lieutenant Colonel North, but for many with whom we worked. I admired them not only for their hard work and professional abilities, but also for their selflessness and deep sense of dedication and loyalty to the President and our country. As a secretary, it was my job to facilitate the smooth operation of the office. I was a dedicated and a loyal secretary and performed my duties in an exemplary manner. I can type."
Okay, Roxanne Roberts, a story the Washington Post broke, Wayne Hayes and Elizabeth Ray.
Well, I think that we should note, since you did the Fawn Hall clip, that at the time of those hearings, Oliver North was very indignant about the fact that because Fawn Hall was beautiful, there were lots of rumors about the two of them. And he was adamant that he had never cheated on his wife. I have no reason to believe that he did. What's interesting and caused a little bit of a stir earlier this fall is that Oliver North just married Fawn Hall. So at least at the very least they became and stayed lifelong friends, and now they're a married couple. But it was because she was a beautiful young woman, there was lots of rumors at that time. Now, Elizabeth Ray was a very buxom blonde, and reportedly, I think it's not unfair to say dumb as a rock. She just wasn't the sharpest, knife in the toolbox. But she sort of stumbled into this relationship. Now, the thing about Hayes that I think is incredible is that he sort of says, okay, I admit it. I had sex with her. Now my conscience is clear, completely ignoring the fact that Ray was on his payroll. Taxpayer dollars were being used so he could have his afternoon delights, and seemed to be fine with all of that. Again, I do think that they're certainly more so back then, but the sense of privilege, the sense of I get to do what I want and everybody's going to look the other way. The reason this story finally broke is that he is correct. He was engaged to a woman back home, I believe, and he invited the entire staff to his wedding, but he did not invite Elizabeth. And Elizabeth wasn't mad that he was getting married. She wasn't in love with him. She didn't want to be the next Mrs. Hayes. She was just offended that she had not been included in the invitation. She thought it was disrespectful to her that all the rest of the staff would go to this wedding, but she was not.
And again, she was on staff when
she was on staff.
So everybody in the office gets invited except for her.
This was her job. Her job was not to type. Her job was not to file or answer phones. Her job was to have sex.
Afternoon delights, as you said. Yes.
Afternoon delights was to have sex with Wayne Hayes when he chose for that to happen. And Hayes seems to kind of act as if, as long as he now has admitted it, that's just fine. It was consenting adults, and it was consenting adults. But he completely ignores the fact that he betrayed taxpayer trust and used taxpayer dollars to have this. I think it would have been somewhat of a scandal if another powerful congressman, if we found out he had this mistress on the side. But what sealed the deal on this one is that she was on his staff.
Yeah. And, you used the word powerful again, and it was in the article, powerful chairman of the House Administration Committee. And you made that point earlier that these are compelling figures in power. And, not to defend any of this, but you can see how someone who was awestruck by someone who is a powerful chairman has that leverage.
Or just, even if she wasn't awestruck, the idea of having a close relationship with somebody powerful in Washington, if you were ambitious, I'm not sure she was ambitious. I'm not sure she saw a career for herself as a congressional aide. But there's a lot of who do you know? And if you are attached, even as a staffer, in the completely traditional sense, to a powerful member of Congress, that's going to open a lot of opportunities for you for your career going forward. So there's the personal attraction, but there's also the professional, ambitious attraction to being associated with somebody like that. So yeah, if you get to go work, to this day, if you're working for a powerful senator, if you're working for a powerful congressman, you're going to have a lot more opportunities. And that's just the straightforward just employment.
One final point on Wayne Hayes before we move on. You mentioned you were doing research, you found more facts as you were doing research on these. I went through the congressional record and found what he said on the floor. I was struck that he used language you wouldn't hear anybody say about a woman now, hysterical.
Oh, like she's crazy.
She's crazy.
She's just crazy. Yeah. Well, I mean,
that's a time capsule of an older.
It is a time capsule but the fact that he felt comfortable saying that is a reflection on how far women and their professional opportunities and their professional profile has changed. He would have been tarred and feathered by virtually every woman who works on Capitol Hill. I mean, even Speaker Johnson right now is getting some grief for suggesting that women don't think in a strategic and comprehensive way. And the women are saying, hey, bud, where do you get that notion, 50 years ago? Because we're perfectly capable of thinking in a very linear, straightforward way. So there's always going to be sexism. I mean, I don't think we'll ever get rid of that. But that kind of idea, instead of just saying we both behave badly, which is, in fact, what happened, he has to decide, well, she's crazy and she threatened to blackmail me and she's obviously got emotional problems. And I would say the only emotional problem she had is that she slept with Wayne Hayes, which is icky. A word I think needs to be used more often.
More often, at least in this podcast. All right, now Gary Hart. On May 5th, 1987, the Miami Herald ran a story headlined, "Miami Woman is Linked to Hart. Candidate Denies Any Impropriety." The story began, Gary Hart, the Democratic presidential candidate who has dismissed allegations of womanizing, spent Friday night and most of Saturday in his Capitol Hill townhouse with a young woman who flew from Miami and met him. Hart denied any impropriety. Hart, 50, was confronted late Saturday evening by Miami Herald reporters who had documented the movements of the former Colorado senator and the unidentified woman. The unidentified woman was quickly identified, Donna Rice. The National Enquirer ran a picture of Donna Rice sitting on Gary Hart's lap and holding hands in front of a boat called Monkey Business. The boat was docked in Bimini. The headline, Donna Rice, What Really Happened? Gary Hart Asked Me to Marry Him. Exclusive photos of fun-filled weekend in the Bahamas. On May 8, 1987, 3 days after the Miami Herald article, Gary Hart withdrew from the presidential campaign.
I've made some mistakes. I've said so. I said I would because I'm human, and I did. Maybe big mistakes, but not bad mistakes.
Gary Hart also took a swipe at the press.
We're all going to have to seriously question a system for selecting our national leaders that reduces the press of this nation to hunters and presidential candidates to being hunted, that has reporters in bushes, false and inaccurate stories printed, photographers peeking in our windows, swarms of helicopters hovering over our roof, and my very strong wife close to tears because she can't even get in her own house at night without being harassed. And then after all that, the ponderous pundits wonder in mock seriousness why some of the best people in this country choose not to run for high office.
In December 1987, Gary Hart got back into the presidential race without success. Meantime, Donna Rice Hughes became an anti-pornography activist, an advocate for protecting children online and making the internet safer for children and families. She appeared on C-SPAN's Washington Journal in December 2016.
I went to Barbara Walters, who was an old friend. I said, Barbara, this is what's going on. I'm ready to start talking. Internet safety is going to be where it's at. And it was that conversation. She came back and said, well, I talked to my producers, and they said I can't say pornography on the air. I mean, and she wasn't that familiar with the internet. So we started, we were early pioneers, and it was an exciting time. It really was. But, I also really began to understand how in my own life I have been hurt by predation. And sometimes you minimize those things, and in your life, and I did. And I realized how pornography had played a role in a negative way in my life. And so I felt like that this was something I was supposed to do, and that was 23, 24 years ago now.
Well, and you were mentioning Barbara Walters. You sat down with her recently. I mean, some of our viewers probably recognize you, know your name. Why is this related to, back in 1987, your affair with Gary Hart? Alleged affair with Gary Hart. That you sat down and you talked with Barbara Walters about it. I mean, is this related to your work that you're doing now?
The reason I sat down with Barbara Walters, it's my 5th interview with her. The ones we've done in the past, except for the first one in 1987, when she became a very good friend and a mentor, actually, dear woman, is the ones we did subsequent to that were really about where are we now and how did I journey through that time and decide to take the high road. And I did, and that wasn't easy. There were millions of dollars offered on the table, and I made a choice then to return back to my Christian faith, and my prayer was, how can this be used for good?
Okay, Roxanne Roberts of the Washington Post, Gary Hart and Donna Rice.
Well, they're both being a little bit disingenuous. So let's go back at the moment. The reason reporters discovered this alleged affair is that there had been some question about Gary Hart being a womanizer. And he was like, dudes, you think I'm a womanizer? Follow me around, you'll see. And in fact, they did, because Rice spent the night at his townhouse. Now, to her remarks, I'm not sure how pornography fits into this story, so I'm just going to set that aside. She never has fully admitted that they had a sexual relationship.
She says alleged.
Alleged, yes. Yeah. I mean, she was a young, beautiful young woman. Yeah. She was sitting on his lap. People came to what was probably a correct conclusion about what was happening. The thing that's interesting about Hart is if Hart had said, and there was some hints of this with no confirmation, that he had sort of an open marriage with his wife. If he had said, my wife and I have an open marriage, he's acting as if no good, decent guy is going to want to go into politics because they have to endure this kind of stuff. And maybe in Europe, he would have been fine. But he was in the United States, and he was running for president of the United States. And in the United States, admitting that even if it was true that he had an open marriage, there'd be some people like, I don't know how I feel about that. I'm not sure I like that too much. So he was, quote, a happily married guy with a desire to become president of the United States, and he also had sort of this side life, at least a side chick of some kind. And the American public, not unreasonably, were like, I don't know how I feel about that. And it became a huge scandal. Now, my favorite thing about this huge scandal was the fact that the boat was named Monkey Business, because if I was writing a script about a movie, which in fact there ended up being a movie, someone would say, you can't have it be Monkey Business because that's like way too unrealistic. But I mean, I think in general, he did not think of his infidelity. He said it was a big mistake, but not a bad mistake. I think he didn't necessarily think that that was a moral sin, and maybe we don't know what the arrangement with his spouse was, but he had not communicated that with the American public. So the American voter thought, well, this is just a guy screwing around, and they judged him harshly for that, and he was coming at it, to give him his due, from an entirely different perspective. But again, you can't in your head say, well, I'm morally okay because I have this agreement with my wife, if that was even true, but not communicate that with the public, because the public just thinks, here's a guy cheating on his wife.
Okay, Gary Hart, when he drops out in May 8th, 1987, we played the clip, he says about reporters in bushes, false and inaccurate stories printed, photographers peering in our windows, swarms of helicopters hovering over our roof, wife close to tears. Now, Roxanne Roberts, you've been with the Washington Post, as you say, for 37 years.
Yep.
Have you hidden in bushes? Have you peered in windows? Is this part?
I've not peered in windows. Okay. I have stood in alleys. I have done. Every reporter has done various things. It wasn't crossing the line. It was just like, does that person act? Can you verify something? And that means sometimes going on site to do that. But the reason, I mean, again, it's so disingenuous. The reason this was all happening is he basically issued this challenge. It was like, you think I'm a womanizer? Yeah, follow me around, And it was like, and then the Herald got a tip, and it was true. So the concept of, I mean, there's a lot of hypocrisy there. Instead of just saying, caught me, oops, well, let me explain. Instead, it was like, oh, the press is terrible. I mean, because we're a very easy target, obviously. These terrible press, look, they told the truth about me, and I didn't like that, and that makes me feel bad, and they should feel bad about themselves. But again, we are now going back to this issue. Is this a private matter? It could have been a private matter if he was in any other profession. It maybe would have been a private matter. But if you are running for president of the United States, you don't get to have a unconventional private life without communicating that in some way to voters so that they understand what's happening.
And he mentions in that clip we played, he mentioned his wife. Like, she is part of
the harassment.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Instead of saying that, I mean, I don't think any candidate fully understands what the white hot glare of a national press is when you choose to run for national office. I think that has to come as a shock to the candidate, their spouse, their family. It's kind of shocking. They've been living their lives, and all of a sudden a whole bunch of people are interested in the minutia of their lives. I think that's hard. But I think that in this day and age, and even back with Hart, he had to understand that running for president of the United States is this incredible privilege. And the world wants to know everything about you so that they can make a judgment about whether or not you're fit to be in that office. And this notion that the press was behaving badly by essentially following up on his own challenge it's dumb.
You can use the word icky.
It wasn't icky. It was hypocritical.
Okay.
It was hypocritical, and it was this sort of righteous indignation, like, how dare you actually take me up on the thing that I challenge you to do. I understand that the media will always be the whipping boy in situations like this, but mostly he's just sad he got caught.
And a quick note to listeners, this episode of C-SPAN's podcast, Extreme Mortman, is in 2 parts. This now concludes part 1. We'll continue our conversation with Roxanne Roberts of the Washington Post about her recent article, The Political Sex Scandals That Threw the Nation into a Frenzy, in next week's episode of Extreme Mortman.